So I read some of this out, again, in the interest of keeping us moving along and make up for lost time. Let me just zip through this. FMRPC stands for Remote Procedure Call, FileMaker Remote Procedure Call. The best definition of FileMaker Remote Procedure Call will be to look it up on Wikipedia, but the gist of it is delegating tasks to a remote server, something which has more power capability to perform operations than maybe the client does. It allows, in this particular instance, FileMaker Go and FileMaker Pro to delegate operations to FileMaker Server on demand without any plugins, server-side queues, or server-side schedules. It also expands the functionality of the FileMaker client by allowing you to use plugins on FileMaker Go and perform JDBC commands from Pro or Go, as well as perhaps do other things that you wouldn't have thought of, like talk to the server command line. FMRPC is secure, simple to install, flexible, easy to implement, all of which I hope to show you in the next few minutes. You see the new slide, Jesse? Just checking.
Yes, it's working.
Okay, great. The components of FileMaker FMRPC are a FileMaker Server, a FileMaker Server Advanced with XML web publishing enabled. If you have FileMaker Server Advanced, you could also enable XDBC, and that'll give you those JDBC commands I mentioned previously. You install one service as an application wherever your web server is. You copy and paste a table into your solution, and you copy and paste 2 scripts into your solution. Beyond that, it's just a tiny little bit of scripting, as you'll see shortly, to make FMRPC run some of your scripts and functions for you. So the topology of how things get deployed, just to make that crystal clear, I've got 3 different kinds of deployments indicated here toward the top of the screen, the left and the right. You wouldn't have all 3 of these set up, but if you look at the Getting Started guide for FileMaker Server, you'll note you can install FileMaker Server with the web publishing engine and the web server on one box, or you can split it into 2 different boxes depending on where you want to put the web publishing engine, or you can even go so far as to put it into 3 different boxes. In all these instances, you're going to put FMRPC wherever your web server is. It's that simple. And as long as that web server is configured to support the web publishing engine and FileMaker Server, FMRPC will take care of the rest. It doesn't matter whether you're coming from laptops or tablets running FileMaker Pro, or you're coming from a device like iOS, iPad, or an iPhone running FileMaker Go, or a LAN-connected device. The same thing is going to be true. All of these different devices are going to be able to interact with FMRPC and gain some advantage. So these are the 4 actions, and you're only going to really use 3 of them. But because it's a script, you can look under the hood and see for yourself, how FMRPC does some of the magic it does. But the 3 that matter to you are going to be perform script, which basically lets you tell the custom web publishing engine on FileMaker Server to run one of your scripts. And as long as the script steps that are in that script are compatible with web publishing, it'll perform that script flawlessly. You're going to do perform script no wait, and the only difference between the 2 of these is that perform script no wait doesn't require you to wait around for any kind of result. In fact, it lets you kind of asynchronously go off and do your own thing. You could even log out of the file. And we'll talk about scenarios where that could be really useful as well. And then perform SQL. In this case, what it does is it executes JDBC commands on the FileMaker server, and that you'll see in a second lets you do all kinds of things beyond just select. And then, of course, if JDBC is not available, it's smart enough to actually say, you know what, let's see if I can use the execute SQL function to do that. And, of course, that'll only work if you're doing selects, but at least you won't have to reconfigure your script or your call. It'll kind of self-adapt. There is another action called login, which FMRPC uses specifically to handle authentication, which we're going to cover toward the end of the slideshow here. So now I got 4 slides which talk about all the different kinds of things, just scratching the surface that you could do with FMRPC. I'm not going to read each of these out. I'm going to call out one on each and let you kind of glance at them. But remember, this slideshow and the recording will be available. So one good example you'll see here in a minute is performing a replace across a large batch of records. If you need to transform a large amount of data, you already know moving that. Doing that on FileMaker Go or FileMaker Pro requires all that data to come down to the client and then all that data to go back to the server. And that can be kind of heavy, especially if you're just changing one column and you got to move all these other fields around. So this lets you tell the server to do that replace across that large batch of records. You can also use the execute SQL calculation or function, which you're already using, but you can do it in a lot more optimal a way because now you're not, it kind of performs like FileMaker. It moves all that data and then it performs that select, and then of course you've got all this data, maybe you only wanted a couple columns. Well, now you can use it much more specifically. You can tell server to grab all that data and then grab the 2 columns or the maybe the summary or whatever it is that you were looking for without you having to actually move all that data to the client. You can use it to perform JDBC supported commands if you've got FileMaker Server Advanced, which means now you can do insert, update, delete, create table, drop index, all without a plugin, all without a DSN, all without a driver, all on Go, all on Pro. No new language or special kinds of things you need to learn, no special plugins to buy, license, or install. You just start using the JDBC commands that are built into FileMaker Server Advanced. With perform script no wait, you can tell the server to do all kinds of things you don't want to wait around for, like sending large batches of emails, maybe summarize transaction data in some kind of reporting table, delete large batches of temporary records perhaps, update counters and audit logs if you have a point of sale on or something like that where you don't want to kind of calculate that stuff dynamically, and really perform anything that takes a large number of records to get manipulated for which you don't need to wait around, but you want to go off and do something else. And then on and on and on. We've got a huge list, like I said, and at some point we'll make sure that we post that list either through a blog or up on the documents page at skeletonkey.com. So the primary advantages of FMRPC, it's much leaner for communication. It only moves the data you want to move, not all the data that FileMaker needs to move to let the native client perform those operations. It's optimized because it's working at the server where there's a faster database engine and where the data resides naturally, so the data doesn't really have to move very far at all. In fact, a lot of that data may already be in cache because of all the other clients that are connected, so there's really nothing extra your client has to do. And then it adds powerful functionality like we talked about, plugins with Go, SQL commands from Go or Pro, manipulation of the server command line through interaction with the command line at the server, and a variety of other tricks and tips that we've kind of come up with. Practical advantages for you as a developer is it lets you kind of surgically refactor the slowest parts of your existing solution. So rather than having to necessarily start over or create entirely different interfaces, you might find that you can take your existing solution, identify where the bottlenecks are, and then surgically pull them out, put them in a separate script, and tell FMRPC to call that part of that script. This is really great. This basically lets you take an existing mature solution and just take bottlenecks and fix them without having to start over from the beginning. It's an approach that's been tested both within the FileMaker world. We've seen kind of other and heard other kinds of techniques, sort of informal kinds of ways to approach similar kinds of offloading, and so it also is proven in the other outside world where remote procedure call is sort of a standard process. We've also seen some other techniques in the community independent from this one where people have leveraged web viewers and PHP and other kinds of aspects of the FileMaker ecosystem to offload activity to the server and get better performance. And so we're not inventing anything new, we're just making it really easy to use and secure. And with that, it's built with security in mind. It was really important as we developed this that we made sure that it kept your information secure, your login credentials secure, and still enforced the appropriate access privileges for your users so that just because you're using this server to do the work, they don't suddenly get access to data or to change things that they otherwise wouldn't be able to with their login. And probably the most important one, I think, out of all these is it gets you to start thinking and developing within the whole FileMaker ecosystem and not just the client. I think many of us spend our time just thinking about client, 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 and the server is just a process somewhere that makes things run faster sometimes, or takes care of backup or stability or multi-user. But really, the server is a tool, and often at times it's not as leveraged and as used as by the community as it could be. And so by starting to think about which pieces of your solutions are better run on the server than on the client, you really start to take advantage of the entire platform that you're licensing and working with for you and your clients. Let's talk about security. So we got a diagram or two coming, and those are kind of complex, so we're going to try to boil it down in a few bullets here. FMRPC requires a user to provide their credentials once per session for a given solution. So you do your normal login, and then the first time you execute a command that requires FMRPC, it's going to prompt you for your password. Now, that's not really altogether different than other things we've seen in FileMaker. For example, a lot of ODBC and ESS connections require the user to provide credentials as well. And so this is similar to that. You know, we could hard code them in there, and there's some flexibility to do that. But for those accounts, for example, where users are using Active Directory or Open Directory, or where we don't want to hard code passwords into the solution, you can put in your normal login password again, and it will securely manage that information. And we'll kind of provide some diagrams here in a second that explain why. We only ever send your credentials, if we send them at all, across encrypted connections. So FMRPC is smart enough to recognize whether the connection to the web server is a secure one, and if it's not, we have an alternate method for it to do that handoff of information that maintains the security. The way it does that is if you have an SSL certificate on your own web server, it goes ahead and does it with your own web server because then it's never passing your password in an unencrypted form. If you don't have an SSL certificate on your own web server, then it uses our secure server, the 360 Works secure server, and it does that using a public-private key encryption process to make sure that A, the data is never passed in securely, and B, there's no server out there other than your FileMaker server that's allowed to ask for the rest of your login credentials so it can decrypt them. All of it starts at your FileMaker server and web server, actually in FMRPC. All the key encryption gets started there. All of it ends there. There's no way for someone to spoof in any way, shape, or form, access your credentials or access your solutions via our system. And then finally, it provides some flexibility. It lets the developer choose whether it should just pass along user credentials or if it should use some other approach. Some of you still have home-baked systems for security that are built into your solutions, and you might want to pipe credentials from fields or other parts of the table. We can take care of that. Others of you might decide that you want all of the activity with FMRPC run with a hardwired set of credentials that are shared by all FMRPC users. We can take care of that. So we give you a lot of choice there when it comes to how you do that.
Hey, Mark.
Yes.
This is Jesse. I'm going to jump in for a second. It does not appear that we are getting users' questions appearing in the GoToWebinar control panel. So we're checking on what's going on with that. But in the meantime, if people have questions, they can email them to us instead of using the GoToWebinar to info@SkeletonKey. And Jason will be monitoring that while we're on the webinar and just reading the questions from there instead of from the GoToWebinar. So
okay, and I think I've got access to those. So maybe I just have to jump out of this slideshow a little bit.
So you
I don't know if
see
you guys see the GoToWebinar panel, but I do have access to see those.
Oh,
Chris, if you're hearing us and you can make Jesse an organizer as well without anything breaking, then by all means, I think that's what he needs to be able to see these.
Okay, so
and I'll make sure I will go through these real quick, and I'll take a screenshot at some point and pass them over to you, Jesse. I'm almost done with slides, and we're going to get to demo, and so that'll be a really good time for me to pass over the existing questions to Jesse. And so while I do some of the initial demos, maybe for those of you who haven't seen the videos or aren't familiar with FMRPC, Jesse can parse through that original round of questions and come up with some good ones.
And just for the people listening, ignore what I said about emailing those in because we are seeing the questions coming in now. So continue to send those questions in on the GoToWebinar.
Okay.
Sorry,
so
Mark,
this is that's okay. This is when your web server has an SSL certificate on it. So to be clear, this isn't your FileMaker server. This is your web server. Now they may be the same box, but that's still not the SSL certificate that you install into FileMaker Server. It's not that little checkbox in the FileMaker Server admin console. This is actually making sure your copy of Apache or your copy of IIS, depending on your platform, has an SSL certificate installed in it to make the website secure. By doing that, the login action that's triggered in FMRPC will recognize that it's connected to a secure server. It'll establish the session ID for that user. The credentials will be sent and verified against the database. From that point forward, those credentials don't have to go anywhere because we have an authenticated session ID that's used for that user for their time using that application. Very simple, very straightforward, and definitely the most high-performing and recommended way because there's no need for it to traverse an outside network or at any potential overhead associated with using our server. But if for some reason you can't get an SSL certificate installed easily or in a timely fashion on your server, FMRPC is smart enough to recognize that and automatically try a different approach. So there's a lot of numbers here. I'm not going to bother reading it to you 1 through 7, but the gist of it is your system talks to your server, says, I'd like to connect. It says, I'm not secure, I can't do that. It creates a public and private key. It sends that public key back so that you can securely talk to secure.360works.com. where it then stores that information. You then tell the server, this all happens automatically, by the way, your client then tells the server to go ahead and finish the transaction. It then talks to secure.360works. It gets that encrypted data down over a secure connection, and it decrypts it with the private side of that key. So the keys are born in your server. Only the public key ever goes out, and only your credentials only go over secure connections, and only encrypted communication takes place between your server without SSL and secure.360works.com with SSL. So it's a kind of a classic public-private key triangle configuration, and as you'll see when we get into configuration and setup, it's a simple one-line session where you either have an HTTPS or you have an HTTP, and FMRPC figures it out from there. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to get into a demo, and I'm going to show you the side-by-side, a little bit of under the hood. We're going to talk about adding it to a solution, and we're going to answer your questions. So let me really quickly take a screenshot for you, Jesse, here, and pass that to you for these pictures. Pardon me, folks, while I pass this to Jesse. And now I'm going to go into the demo. So what you've got here is an iPad 3 over Verizon's LTE network that's just publishing its screen over to my computer. My computer's connected to the LAN on the same LAN here, but this device is coming in over 4G or LTE, so it's going to be what you'd expect, a little bit slow because of the constraints of a public network like that. So what we're going to do now is we're going to do some side-by-side comparisons right here. I should note that I haven't authenticated yet with this solution, so I should, when I start clicking be prompted for the authentication. And we had a little technical difficulties in the beginning, so if I haven't, I'll make sure at some point I log out and log back in so you can see that. On the left side of our screen, we have native operations being performed with FileMaker Go over the 4G network directly back to the server. On the right, we have the equivalent or similar operations, and in some case operations you can't perform on FileMaker Go for FMRPC. In the bottom left and the bottom right, we have a big white box which shows in milliseconds how long each of those operations take so we can compare them. And a really important place to eyeball every once in a while here is how many records we're working with. I'm working with 500 records here for these examples over Go, because otherwise it could take too long and eat up our time. And you never know with the 4G network out there what it's going to be like performance-wise. But along the way, you might see that because of some of these functions like delete all, I lose all those records, and I'll be connected on the back end with my FileMaker Pro client, and I'll restore those records so we can continue to do side-by-side tests. So here we go. I'm going to do a replace all across these 500. It just takes one column and adds a random value to it. And we're going to have to wait here a few seconds, of course, because the way FileMaker works is if you've seen any of the WAN performance topics or sessions I've done, or any of the information that the engineers like John Thatcher at FileMaker have put out, FileMaker is record-centric, which means when you want to manipulate data, whether it's read it or modify it, the entire record gets loaded down to the client, changes are made, and then the entire record gets sent back to the server to keep things up to date. It's not atomic where it breaks down just the pieces that it wants or just sends back the deltas. It's a full record download and a full record upload. The records I'm manipulating here are pretty small. They're each about 5 or 10 columns wide, just names and addresses. But you know, if there's 500 of them, and I'm over 4G, so it's going to take a little while for it to do this. Great, so about 42 seconds. Now I'm going to perform the same function for FMRPC. So I had already authenticated, so we didn't have any of the overhead of that first authentication. And because I'd already authenticated before you guys joined us, it didn't ask me again because it has a session running for me. But you can see there's a pretty dramatic difference there. There might have been a couple of extra seconds if I had to type in my password that first time as I fat fingered my way across the keyboard. But beyond that, it's a dramatic difference. So let me reset those timers, and we'll do a slightly smaller test for just 125 of those records, so just a quarter of them. So again, even though we pulled that data down before, because we pulled it down, made changes to it, pushed it back up, we still have a local cache, but there's got to be some communication to make sure that we have the current records, and that took about almost 11 seconds. Whereas I run it on this side, and it's about a second. In this case, I actually added one extra step there. It's worth noting. In this case, I actually returned a result. So I told it to not only replace the column, but then to give me a summary for the total of that new number. Since it's just a bunch of random numbers, I was demonstrating to someone before the session just how you could not just perform an operation for which you couldn't see the results, but you can actually return results even though they're being performed by the server. And we're going to look at that under the hood shortly. Now I'm going to perform a delete all. Delete's an interesting one because even though you wouldn't think you'd have to move a lot of data around, it actually is a pretty slow operation because of its dumping data out of the cache, and I'm not really sure under the hood all the different kinds of communications are taking place. But either way, you end up paying for a little time. So I'm going to go ahead and hit delete all natively. And of course, I have to wait. We're just going to take a few seconds to finish what it's doing, and when it's done doing that, I'm actually going to restore the data. And then I'm going to run delete all on the other side, but I'm actually using a different approach with the delete all on FMRPC. In this case, I'm going to use perform script no wait. So the first two buttons, replace all and replace 125, were just perform script. So I waited till that operation was done, and in the case of replace 125, it actually sent a result back to me. And that result in this case was a sum. But that result could have been, an array of data from a virtual list. It could have been the first or the last record. It could have been a max value. It could have been any number of things. It could have just been a message saying process is complete. In the case of delete all, I'm not going to wait. And so that took about 42 seconds for that to happen. So let me just take a second here. I'm going to bring over here the connected version. That's my sample file we're going to use here in a second. I'm going to go ahead and import 500 records again. Okay, great. And now if we look back here, you can see on the Go client down there on the bottom of the screen, those 500 records are back again. So now I can run the delete all. In this case, it's a like I said, perform script no wait. So if I'm fast enough, what I'm going to do here in this example is I'm going to hit delete all, and then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start adding new records, which is kind of a very quick thing I can do to demonstrate that I'm working asynchronously, that the server is doing the delete all thing, and I've moved on to do something else. Now, you would probably do something else like, I don't know, hit the delete all button and then go to another layout and start creating new stuff, or you might hit, send those 100 emails and then you'd go on to do more data entry. So either way, I'm done. I could even log out of FileMaker and the server would continue processing the command that I had sent it until it was complete, because I'm not expecting any feedback of any kind. Errors, results, nothing. I'm just telling the server to do it. So I'm going to hit delete all, and then very quickly, or as quickly as I can, I'm going to start hitting plus at the bottom there to add new records. So it sends the command, nothing for me to wait for. You'll notice if you look at the counter that it's counting down, and I wasn't fast enough. Even though I started adding new records, it deleted those 500 records and was able to get that done fairly quickly. I'm going to go ahead and put more records into the mix there, because I think if I do that with a few more records, it'll be a little bit more obvious how long it's taking. So now you can see here we have about 2,003 records over there on the FileMaker Go client. I'm going to hit delete all, and now I'm going to add new records, adding new records, and again, it let me add the new records. It deleted all the ones that were there when I issued the command. So that's an example of the perform script no wait. Maybe not the best example because I have to be faster than I am there, or have more records to delete to have it actually work that way. Let's go ahead and do another one. So you'll notice the next two buttons, import all and insert all, they're labeled differently, and that's because they are very different. This is where we're actually using, on the left, a native import. We're importing data from one table in this teaser file to another table in the teaser file, basically to put back the data. Let me go ahead and clear it out so we have no records in there now. Okay, so import all is going to move 500 records from table to table using a native FileMaker import. Insert all is going to use an insert command with perform SQL to actually use a JDBC command on the server to do it for me using JDBC. So very different approach. Let's see the difference. So this is going to be in some ways kind of like the delete. You have to wait some time for the data to move from one table to the other, and whatever has to happen there. And depending on indexes and so on, that could take time. So it took about 6.2 seconds. I'm going to go ahead and do the insert all. And that took about a second. So it's still faster, and of course if you're moving more data around, it's going to be dramatically faster, because in general what we find the more we use the buttons on the right is that they scale really well. Because it's the server and because the data is there, unless you're doing something very complicated, if you're doing kind of just batch operations, deleting, replacing, creating, importing, and so on, those kinds of things scale very well and tend to produce kind of common results back to us. If we're taking that data and putting it through a loop or generating summaries and stuff, then we might have to wait a little longer. And then, of course, if we're sending results back, depending on how much data we're sending back, even just a chunk of text, that could add a little bit of overhead on FMRPC. But generally, none of that compares to the delay we might encounter. You notice before we had 42 seconds, 6 seconds. We're seeing factors of 8 to 10 or even sometimes 20 or 30 times a performance gain by using FMRPC. So the next two buttons on the right are examples of stuff with plugins. So I'm using FileMaker Go. There are no plugins. The first one's using Get Stock Quote, uses the Base Elements plugin. You can actually get stock quotes using scraping in web viewers and insert from URL, but it's an example of using a plugin regardless. So I'm going to go ahead and hit Get Stock Quote, and it's going to call a script that uses a plugin that's installed on the server to get me a quote for Apple. On the Run Credit Card side, we're actually using the Plastic plugin from 360 Works, and we're going to run a transaction, a credit card transaction. So I'm not going to queue it up and then wait for a server-side queue to run. I'm just going to say, please perform this transaction and send me a result to tell me, did it succeed? And we're just doing a test transaction, so nobody's credit card is being run, but they're still performing the same operations on the server with the plugin. And a successful charge, and I have a transaction number. So real-time point-of-sale transactions with credit cards without a plugin installed on my FileMaker Go solution. So the last buttons I have down at the bottom before we get into under the hood is virtual list arrays. And I just wanted to create an example of this because this is a great example where results could be very helpful. So at this point I have 1,000 records. And they're just, like I said, a bunch of demographic data, but there's a bunch of common zip codes in that data. And you might have virtual list demands. Virtual list is, where you take a large set of data and you summarize it into like an array. This is a technique I think was developed by Bruce Robertson, and various sample files have come out from him and seed code and even displayed at DevCon in various sessions to explain to people how you can use this to create summarized data in portals. But really what it has to do is it has to move a lot of data around to create those summaries, even if the result is a very tiny block of text. but it's a technique that's becoming very popular, and it's a perfect fit for what FMRPC can do, because moving that kind of data around on Go to create dashboards with summaries is a perfect use case for Go, but it's not a perfect use case for Go when it comes to the amount of data that might be involved. So in this case, I want to generate a few more records to make this really stand out. So I'm going to go ahead and keep using that insert command because it's a lot faster than import. And I'm just inflating the size of my record set. You can see it down there in the bottom that it's up to 3,000 records. I'm going to stop when I get to about 5,000 records. And we're going to have to wait a little bit of time here for it to run the virtual list array natively. So I'm going to go ahead and get that started. And we're going to have to wait for it to basically read all those 5,000 records down, sort them by zip code, and group them to give me a count by zip code. It's doing this, into a data viewer. It's putting it into a global variable. I don't actually have it displaying a result that's visible here. I could show it and run it on the FileMaker Pro client, and you could see it. It actually would perform pretty well over the LAN too, even using FMRPC. But the main thing is it took 27 seconds, almost 26 seconds, 8 seconds for it to run a 5,000 record virtual list array. When I run it on the right, we're going to do it a little differently. We're going to run the same array, but because I'm on the Go client, I need that answer back. I can't get it from the global variable that's on the server. I need that server to pass that back to me as a result. So there's going to be a little overhead as it takes that block of text at the end and passes it back to me. But I think we should see, even with this amount of records, a nice performance gain. So there's the result. Same result was produced by either side. On the left side, it was put into a global variable. On the right side, it was put into a global variable on the server and then passed back through FMRPC to me so I can put it into my local variable or wherever it is that I wanted to put it. 10-to-1 improvement in performance there. So before I go ahead and go under the hood and start showing a little bit about how this file is set up in FileMaker Pro, because obviously that's where you do your setup, are there any particular questions that you think we should cover, Jesse?
Looking at the questions right now, something a lot of people are asking about, what is the setup like? So I think that's what you're about to get to. I've seen several questions about record locking. If you want to talk about that.
Sure. So let me take care of that one right off the bat. Since we're sending requests to FileMaker Server and the custom web publishing engine to perform operations as me, with my login, if we were to go into the admin console, all we would really see is more instances of me logged in. So for example, I think I have on my computer here a little peek at the admin console. Here it is. And I can go to clients. And you can see here that there's an admin connection over XDBC. There's an admin connection over XML. I was logged in as admin with my password. So the username here is coming from the computer that's performing it. In the case of no computer, the server, it uses the account name. But this is all of me logged in on my iPad, on my Mac, as well as the XML and XDBC connections that were connected on my behalf as me. So the simple answer is that the same rules apply. The same opportunities for record locking on either side of this equation is going to happen, whether it's other users in there with FileMaker Pro or FileMaker Go, or other users in there over ODBC, or other users in there over web publishing. It's the same here. It's just the difference is it's me running into me. But otherwise, the same rules apply. We're not overriding any of those behaviors. We're just effectively spawning clones of ourselves in the web publishing engine or in the XDBC engine to perform operations on our behalf and then send back results, or just let us keep going on and doing our own thing. So let's look under the hood. So,
Mark,
yes.
Does that work differently for a perform script versus perform script no wait? What are the implications from a record locking standpoint?
My understanding is that it shouldn't have any real difference at all. The only difference is that I'm not waiting for FMRPC to deliver any kind of result or back to me. In fact, the times that we see when we run perform script no wait. So let me just go ahead and do this right here. So so I got 5,000 records. If I run delete all, you'll now see how the login prompt looks for the user the first time they run it. I haven't run an FMRPC command from this copy of FileMaker Pro yet, but I can run them from Pro, and in fact there's some really great use cases for that, which we can talk about as time permits. So we're going to re-enter our password. This is the first time I have to enter it. And now it's performing it for me, and you can see the counters going down because the server, but of course I can be moving around, I can be switching layouts, I can be doing all kinds of stuff while I was counting down. So the real difference there isn't in that record locking or any of the rules that govern normal FileMaker multi-user behavior. That still all pertains. The difference is that I don't care about what that user is doing. I'm not waiting for that user to get back to me with a result, and in fact, the time that I see coming back to me is how long it took for the request to go there and back. In this case, it's the request plus the password login. The time is usually very short. In fact, if I was to generate a bunch more data and then hit delete all, 49 milliseconds. That's not how long it took to delete the records. That's how long it took for FMRPC to get the command and say, I got it, and then let me go off and do my own thing because it performs script no wait. Otherwise, all the same record locking and multi-user rules apply.
Okay, let's jump into the under the hood. I think that'll address several questions.
Okay, so I've done this in a very literal way. Each of these buttons just calls a script, and I'm going to kind of show you the differences under the hood. So let's go under here and look. We have the two scripts we talked about. We're going to show you how to add those to a solution, but it's just copy and paste. We're never going to look inside this script. We're never going to modify anything inside this script. You're really only going to call this script, as you'll see in a second, and there's a couple settings in here you may want to modify, but you, in many cases, won't have to at all. So let's look at some examples. Here's my replace all script. And I've put little indicators next to each of the steps that matter. The rest here is just, measuring how long it took or putting the name of the script on the user interface for the demo side by side. This is really what replace all does. It shows all records and replaces a column with a random number. So let's compare this script with the same one run with FMRPC. So very simple construct. Perform script, FMRPC, and I pass it a parameter. And the parameter I'm passing includes the action, perform script, carriage return, and the name of the script I want to perform. Not much different when we go and we look at replace 125, slightly different version. It's doing an omit to get a smaller set of records. There's that set field I talked about. This is where I pass a result back. This is the method for passing results back. Again, all this is documented, and it's in the demo file, and it's also up on our wiki, so you're just getting a peek at it now, but you add a simple set field FMRPC script result, which is a global field with whatever the result you wanted was, and then that's available automatically to the local user who called it in the first place. So this is the actual script, the original one. I had to add this one step to the original script to make it perform well with FMRPC, and then here's FMRPC calling it, and then of course it's got the same exact same thing before, a parameter to perform script and the script it wants to perform, and then it has this show custom dialog where it gets the script result. And so basically the result that's coming out of FMRPC is this result that's coming out of that field. So you have to master basically a very simple perform script FMRPC with some parameters, which there's only 2 or 3 choices there. And then you have to master, if you want results to come back, which you often will, the ability to set a field with the result and the ability to do something with the result when it comes back. But once you master this set field and this get script result, which you probably already are using in a lot of your other solutions, it becomes a very easy process to take a little chunk of code that isn't performing well, give it to the server, get back what you need, and continue on with the rest of your process. Let's take a little look at something that was different. The delete all, pretty standard, show all records, delete all records, nothing special there. It is worth noting, of course, as I mentioned, that the stuff that I'm running has got to be web publishing compatible. So you're going to get used to using this show compatibility to make sure that there's nothing in here that matters to you that's going to trip up your script or cause it to fail, because there's a lot of script steps you can see here on the left which are black, they're not gray, which are totally supported by web publishing, and there's a few which are not. And so this is not a good fit. For example, you can't import records with custom web publishing. That's why we use the insert command with JDBC. It gives us a workaround for a really important piece of that puzzle. Delete all is a little different. It's using a slightly different parameter, perform script no wait. And otherwise it does the same thing, calls a script. The virtual list approach we're going to get back to in a second. The plugin examples are pretty straightforward. Here's the run the credit card charge. Now I happen to have this particular plugin installed right here on my machine. Please don't use our serial number. I happen to have this set up on my machine so I can actually do the coding, but I could take it off my machine and I just see a bunch of function missing. But that's okay, because when I run it from FMRPC, it doesn't see it doesn't matter that the Go can't see those commands. FMRPC is going to see those commands. And so perform script and character return, and then run the credit card charge. So it's the same exact approach, perform script or perform script no wait over and over. In this case, of course, because I'm running this from iOS, it is going to be visible, and I can see that dialog box. Same thing for the get stock quote, it's just using a different plugin. With the virtual list, I basically did these a little bit differently because I wanted to give you a peek at another approach. Here I've got the create array script. So this is the one on the left side of the screen. Again, a bunch of housekeeping stuff along the top there. But really, this is where the magic happens. I'm using an execute SQL to get a distinct count of zip codes with 2 columns, the zip and the count. And I wanted to do a slightly different approach when it came to FMRPC. So I wanted to use something called the Bootstrap method, and that's just what we're calling this because it basically uses a few extra steps to make your script smart enough that if you call it with a device or a platform that you want to use FMRPC, you can have the script recall itself with FMRPC. So the basic logic here is it says, whatever your conditions are, and in this case my conditions were if I was using Go or Pro, didn't matter. Maybe it's just Go, maybe it's just Go or Pro on a different network, or maybe it's just Go after 5 p.m. It could be whatever conditions you want. But if it encounters that condition, it'll call this script using the getScriptName function using FMRPC. So basically, it'll stop running the script, and it'll call the script again, but it'll tell FMRPC to run it for me. And you can even extend that further. You could have it be perform script and the carriage return pilcrow, and then you can even add another pilcrow and do get script parameter. So if you've actually passed a script parameter, I know you don't like watching me type, Jesse. If you passed a script parameter, and in the first place, you can pass both the script name and the same parameter along to FMRPC, and it'll rerun itself. So it'll kind of bootstrap itself and self-determine that based on your conditions that it's time for it to actually run this through FMRPC and then continue on its merry way. Otherwise, if it's the server that's running it, which is going to happen when FMRPC runs it, it's going to skip this first if branch and just go ahead and run it the way it's supposed to. There's my result to pass the array back, and everything's good. So we really got 2 ways. You can literally call it directly by saying call this script or run this SQL. Or you can say if conditions exist which make me want to run this over FMRPC, please dynamically recall this same script and run it again and run it with the same parameter, but make FMRPC do it for me instead. So a very neat technique that Jesse developed that really helps you implement this in place in your solutions without having to kind of do direct pointing at scripts. Do you want to say something, Jesse?
I was just going to say, do you want to show the actual, and I've been looking at the question, so tell me if you've already covered this. Do you want to show the actual process of how you add it to your solution separately from how you invoke it? Or
Absolutely.
Is that
yeah,
okay.
we should do that. And so I want to show one more example here, and then I know it means we're going to, because we started late, we're going to go over. So I understand if folks have to go. Chris, I'm hoping as the organizer that we can keep running a little bit long on this session to allow us to at least record the rest of the presentation so people who can't stay can watch it later. Please let me know if I'm wrong about that.
That's fine.
And then I'm going to quickly show you this last example and then get into the how you add it to a solution. So this is the import all native. And I had to make this smart enough so that it could, determine a path dynamically and such, so that it worked on both Pro and Go, and I didn't have anything hardwired. But nothing too surprising here. It goes to a particular layout, it sets a variable, and it imports records based on that variable to bring the data from a sample data table into our working data table. Otherwise, the rest of the stuff around the edges is just the timers and stuff. Here's the insert all. This is where we're using that third action. Perform SQL and pilcrow again. And then we have an insert command, which of course is not supported by execute SQL and normally requires execute SQL or requires a plugin or requires DSNs or all of the above. And now I'm just telling FMRPC, hey, switch over to JDBC and run this insert command. And so it's actually inserting data from the sample data table into the working data table without me actually having to program it.
Let me jump in for 1 sec, Mark, and maybe address 2 questions at once that are relevant to what you're talking about. A couple questions about the version of FileMaker and whether Server Advanced is required or not. So we do require FileMaker 12. This will not work on FileMaker 11 and earlier. The question about Server Advanced, FMRPC will work fine with regular FileMaker Server, but if you're using Server Advanced, then you can use the stuff that Mark is showing right now where he's using an insert. You cannot normally use anything but a select statement when you're using the built-in execute SQL feature. If you're using FileMaker Server Advanced, and only if you're using FileMaker Server Advanced, then you have access to the entire SQL set as outlined in FileMaker Server Advanced Documentation. So you can do inserts, you can do deletes, drop tables, alter tables, really, really crazy stuff like adding fields on the fly to a table or creating tables from scratch. What FMRPC does in that case is it pipes it through the JDBC feature that is part of what distinguishes FileMaker Server Advanced from FileMaker Server. If you're running FileMaker Server and not Server Advanced, it will still work if you're just doing select statements. FMRPC will execute those using the regular execute SQL statement. It just won't be able to do like inserts, deletes, updates.
Exactly. Thanks, Jesse. All right. So let's talk about adding it. Give you guys a quick peek at that. So I have another file here called sample. And all sample is a very simple one table working data. It's actually the same. It has 1,000 records. It's pretty much the same as the teaser file, but it's just got nothing else in it. So you're going to have this demo file that we ship with FMRPC, and it contains, like any other copy of FMRPC enabled solutions, the table and the 2 scripts. So I'm going to basically add it to the solution. I'm going to go into a demo file or something which has FMRPC in it. I'm going to copy the table. I'm going to come here into my sample file, and I'm going to paste the table. Okay, that's the first part. The next thing I'm going to do is go into manage scripts in my sample file, my teaser file, my demo file. I'm going to copy those 2 scripts. Got to copy them at the same time because they have references to each other, and they also reference the table, of course, so I need to make sure I always do the table and then the 2 scripts. That's it. And I'm going to go to scripts in here, and I'm going to paste them in. All right, so I've added FMRPC to my solution. The only thing I didn't show you is installing FMRPC on the actual server. That's easy. It's like a double click, yes, install. It installs. It's done. There's really very little to choose or interact with in the installer, and the updates are the same way. You can actually update them while FMRPC is running, and it'll just update the next version. So since obviously it's a new product, odds are there'll be an update not too distant future, either adding features or fixing bugs, and it's a really easy and seamless process. We've been through it a lot. So now, how do I actually add it to use it in the solution? So I happen to have a script here. It's very similar to the ones you saw before. Replace all. So you can guess how easy this is going to be. I'll do it the basic method, which is I'm going to say new script, replace all with FMRPC. Okay, and I'm going to do perform script, FMRPC. The parameter is going to be perform script and Pilcrow and replace all. So of course I'm directly calling it. This is sort of the typical way, but I now have made a separate script. So I'm managing scripts. If you use that Bootstrap method, I could actually modify this script and it would be smart enough to do it for me. But let's go ahead and verify that this works now. So I'm going to show the data, okay, and you're just going to watch this column. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and clear out that column so that you can actually see it get filled in. So I'm not inside the fields. I'm going to run the replace all with FMRPC because it's the first time I'm running FMRPC as this user on this file. I'm going to get asked to log in. And then the server's doing its thing. And then eventually, the updates make their way to me. It's that simple. Copy, paste, and then start deciding if you want to implement with direct calls or if you want to implement with Bootstrap calls. And of course, probably the hardest job ahead of you isn't going to be implementing FMRPC. It's going to be figuring out where in your solution are those bottlenecks and how to best extract those bottlenecks and treat them with FMRPC and pass whatever result is needed back to the client so it can continue with the non-bottlenecked pieces of your solution. Okay, in the interest of time, I know we want to answer more questions, so let me switch back real quick to the PowerPoint. So you should be able to go to www.skeletonkey.com/FMRPC, and either, if not right by the end of the seminar, then by the end of today, put in your email address, click to download a demo file, and in there you'll have the installer. You'll have a demo file, covers similar examples to one you've seen here. That demo file is kind of smart. It has the ability to generate sample data, so it's not a very big download, but it'll generate a bunch of data for you so that you can test it. And of course, you can test this over the LAN or you can test it over the WAN, and I'm pretty sure that the scripts we have in the demo file are smart enough to create either a very large data set for LAN testing or a very small data set for WAN testing, where you don't need a lot of data to see the difference. In the interest of time, I'm not going to take time now to show you LAN tests, but I will say if you're moving thousands of records around, I don't care if you're deleting 10,000 records or creating a virtual list array out of 100,000 records or doing anything that moves around hundreds or thousands of records, it does serious operations with them, we can see significant gains even on LAN-based solutions with FileMaker Pro, where there's gigabit Ethernet involved, but the data payload that has to be moved around just to get to this little array or this little answer at the end is egregious for the clients to move around. And now we can just tell the server, hey, you probably already have that data cached. Just give me the answer, please, and boom, it comes back in moments as opposed to in seconds or minutes. If you want to stay in sync with us and know what's going on with FMRPC, by all means, we're going to keep taking questions. You can send us email. Keep an eye on our Twitter links where we're going to continue to announce updates and upgrades to FMRPC, and we'll continue to have blog posts or other content available as well. And now, if you have any additional questions, by all means, let's try to take a few minutes and answer them before everybody leaves.
Mark, I've been trying to kind of group them together so we can knock out several questions at once. The most common question right now is cost. Do you want to talk about that?
Sure. I'm pretty sure we've got a licensing slide. So the workgroup cost is $295. You can use this on one FileMaker server with up to 10 simultaneously connected users in your solution and up to 2 FileMaker files. And the goal there was to let you host your demo file and host your solution and then implement your solution and have the demo file handy to make sure everything's working and you don't get kind of stuck. If you want to go to the next level, which is to increase the number of solutions and the number of users, you would go to the enterprise license, which is $495. Again, it's for one server, so if you're going to have multiple servers in your environment, like a sandbox or something, you'll need another license. But now you can use it with an unlimited number of users and an unlimited number of files. We do have a hosting license, which allows you to install multiple instances of FMRPC on the same server. You can name them differently and assign different ones with different settings to different clients, but the pricing for that's variable depending on your needs. So if you're a hosting provider and you want to give your clients the ability to amp up their FileMaker Go connections and Pro connections, by all means give us a shout and we'll be happy to talk about terms. And then probably the most exciting piece of this is that Jesse's bundling this offering FMRPC enterprise license into your FBA portfolio, because we really want FBA members in the FileMaker community to get their hands on this solution and show us what it can do and help us make it better. We've already got some great ideas about ways we can take it to another level and advance it even further. So you'll be able to get access to it in your portfolio.
And as far as the context and the found set, can you talk about that and like what do you need to do to make sure you're working with the right set of records on the server?
Sure. That's a great question. So FMRPC gets 2 out of 3 things right there, and that mostly just has to do with ease of doing it. And we've got some ideas for how to handle the third. So the first thing it does is it knows what layout you're on, and it keeps that same layout on the web publishing side. The second thing it knows is which record you're on, and it keeps you on the same record on the web publishing side. So if you're modifying a record or working within a particular context on all the records, or you're performing an execute SQL command where it almost doesn't matter where you are, then you're all set. But you'll notice in all my examples I was showing all records or I was showing all records and omitting, and that's because it doesn't currently have a built-in way to pass the current found set. So it's kind of like making a new window, you know, in FileMaker, that the context you're in has the same found set, but all the other contexts in the background revert back to all records. And it's the same thing when you use FMRPC. We've got an idea. You might have even seen me post out there on Seed Code's blog. That there may be a way we can use snapshot links and a little bit of trickery to pass the found set between your client and FMRPC, so we can actually reestablish the found set and operate. That's something we would really love to add, and so that's honestly tops on our list in terms of new features to add. You might be able to develop that same kind of functionality yourself, but it's something I can tell you right now we're aiming to pursue.
And I think can you spend just really quickly talking about customizing the authentication, both from an aesthetic standpoint, like what if you want to change the messages or the wording,
yeah,
and then also if you know the user's credentials, where do you specifically go to configure that so that they don't even get prompted?
Sure. So I'm going to go inside this FMRPC script, and this is where all the configuration that you should have to do will take place. Most of the configuration you need to do takes place up here in these 4 variables, and honestly, the way we ship the demo file and the scripts, you could generally copy and paste it without making any changes at all. So let's take a quick look at these, and then we'll jump down to the login credentials. The first is where you set your web server address. You'll notice that, by the way, that all the global variables we declare always are prefixed with FMRPC. Everything else that we declare is a local variable, so it's just affecting the scripts that we've given you and has no impact on your solution otherwise. And we ship it by default expecting to use the host IP address of a single server instance, the standard kind of what a lot of people use for FileMaker, everything in one box. In which case you can basically just paste it in. If you do this, however, with HTTP, then it's going to use that proxy, the secure.360works.com. All you have to do is comment this out and release this if you've got your own SSL certificate, and it'll do all that authentication locally. For your users, they won't know the difference. Again, there might be a second or two of extra overhead on that first authentication if you're using secure.360works versus using your own SSL certificate. But some organizations, it's harder to get that SSL certificate installed because of technical needs. The next is the web app name. Again, you shouldn't have to change this. If you're a hosting provider, this is really where you'd probably be coming in to make changes to the web app name per client or per solution. The error handler is where you can basically set on or off whether you want the error handling steps that are further down in the script to be on or off, and whether you want errors to come back to the users. Because I did my demo with no errors, knock on wood, you didn't see any of the error messages that would come up. And then allow user abort off. If you turn that on, then you're going to have the ability to cancel those calls to FMRPC, and your mileage will vary depending on what kind of call you're making and what your script expects as a result. I'm not sure what will happen, but we wanted to make sure you had the ability to either force those perform script actions or execute SQL actions to complete, or have the ability to potentially interrupt the process midstream, and so you can toggle that. But to get to the specific question, this is the section right here where we control the username and password. So you can see here that we're using the person's current account name by default. And you, of course, can hardwire that to something else. So if you know it, you could actually come in here and just set that variable to something else. That could be a value you stored somewhere else, or it's stored in the table, or stored in a variable, or whatever, but we're assuming it's you, and the person who's logged in is you. We assume if you're guest, there's no password, so we set that for you. Otherwise, we prompt you. So if you want to change the language in the login prompt, you can change the logic here. The main thing is that when it's all said and done is that it has to be able to come out of this end result with the username and password available. The way the FMRPC works with those two scripts is it kind of figures out, is this an authenticated user or not, and it does a little bit of that kind of bootstrapping itself to call itself with a different parameter and say, hey, let's first log in before I continue doing what you asked me to do. So you need to be careful when you're modifying these values that you're not changing the logic so dramatically that you're going to break what FMRPC expects, which is it needs to know what the username is as a local variable, needs to know what it is, the password is as a local variable, needs to pass those as a script result out of the script so that the engine for FMRPC can do the magic that it needs to do to authenticate.
But
so
really,
you can hardwire your username, hardwire different messages, and even hardwire the password if you need to.
and all that really matters is that line there, that exit script where we're returning with the username and the password. Whatever you need to do to exit with some username and a password and a return separated list, you could pull it from Open Directory or LDAP if you know. I mean,
right.
You
could basically pull this out right here, this entire chunk, and just have if the parameters get login credentials, because that's part of that bootstrapping. Exit the script with this.
Right.
Below this, just really quickly, there's a little bit about error handling, so you can take a look at this. It's pretty straightforward. And then we do some cleaning up of our global variables to declutter your data viewer as well.
And I think it's probably the last question. A lot of questions about MultiFile Solutions and cross-file, like how does it work with multiple separate database files on the server and talking between those?
Do you want to answer that one?
I think you've done. Maybe you can help me out with this, because some of this I know, and I think some of this you've experimented with. It will definitely work because we use this a very similar technique in MirrorSync. If you have external table occurrences from one file in another, if you just need to work with the data in, if you've got files A, B, and C, if you call a script in file A and it has table occurrences from B and C, it can do whatever it needs to the data that are stored in B and C. So I know that will work. One thing I'm not sure about, and Mark, this is where I think maybe, I thought you said you were doing some experiments on this. I don't know, if you call a script in A, I don't honestly know whether it's able to call subscripts in file B or file C on the same server. And I don't know if that's what the question was asking or not. But did you experiment with that at all?
I did a while ago, but in a much earlier version. My understanding, though, is that as long as the web publishing engine has the ability to use the same credentials it's logged in to perform scripts in files for which you are technically authenticated, it should work. We need to do some testing, I think, to confirm that that authentication process we're doing, Jesse, is not constrained to the one file that we're connected to now. And that would be the only hurdle I could see that potentially would come up, is if I'm trying to run this script is in another file, and I need to authenticate. In FileMaker, natively, that process of me using the same credentials kind of happens automatically. I can't say off the top of my head whether in web publishing that same authentication process will be as transparent, or if we wouldn't have to have some kind of mechanism to re-authenticate or also authenticate into that other file. So let's make that one of the top items that we'll meet offline about after this, and we'll test. And I'll make sure to include that either in a Twitter post or as an update up on our docs.skeleton-key site, which you can get to from that skeleton-key.com FMRPC page, so that people understand if they have a multi-file solution, how would that work? There's a potentially a licensing issue there as well in terms of the constraints for FMRPC, so that's another piece of that puzzle, not just authentication, and so we'll need to look more closely at that and get back to you guys.
And actually, I'm going to take one more question because it's about performance, which is one of my favorite topics. A lot of questions, 3 or 4 questions about multiple requests, heavy load, lots of users. This is something that I've personally really worked hard on, is making it very efficient. FMRPC is completely multi-threaded at the server level, and it will queue up multiple requests to the FileMaker web publishing engine. And I don't actually know the internal guts of the FileMaker web publishing engine as far as how multi-threaded it is. But I can say that just in empirical benchmarks, I've noticed very, very big performance improvements when making multiple requests. Like, for instance, I was recently doing some benchmarking on FileMaker Server, just running on a Mac Mini, and what I found is that it was hitting about 30 to 35 requests per second, operations per second, where a script was being triggered on the server via the XML web publishing, and it was doing a search and returning about 200 records in the found set. And so I think that you're not going to have, I think it's very, very unlikely that you will encounter bottlenecks due to just performance overhead in FMRPC. Of course, if you're running, just a gigantic script that's, doing huge amounts of stuff, then that will slow things down, just exactly as if you had a user on the network that was, or I guess more accurately, if you had a copy of FileMaker Pro running on the server doing some very intensive operation, obviously there are limits to processing power, but you won't run into problems in terms of requests queuing up in a single threaded fashion. You'll be able to fully take advantage of however much horsepower FileMaker Server has.
And you could argue that there's, even though we're not comparing apples to apples, because the FileMaker native, the server database engine is a different beast than the web publishing engine, which is sort of an intermediary for FMRPC. But there is no network overhead really associated with FMRPC other than the initial call and whatever result you might be asking it to send you back. It could be a tiny result or almost nothing. So even if you were doing this natively with FileMaker, you'd have, in addition to, everything would be kind of spread out because it takes longer. So less would be happening all in the same slice of time. But you'd have significant network traffic activity going in terms of data being written out to the network interfaces and across the internet, and all the extra traffic, even with the optimized performance calls with FileMaker Server 12 and larger packets, there's still going to be some overhead and communication going on. With FMRPC, you're compressing this activity into much smaller windows and then letting it all happen on the server where there's really almost no network activity. So not a true apples-to-apples comparison, but for a server which has multiple processors and plenty of RAM, often what we find is that the severest limit is that network interface, especially the one pointing to the internet. And so the idea that we're not using the tightest bottleneck we've got and allowing most of this activity to take place on the server, plus the improvements we've seen in the web publishing engine recently with Server 12, all adds up to a really significant benefit. I will say that in addition to seeing performance benefits we've seen on the LAN with certain operations, there are certain things, where it isn't going to be performed as well. If we're moving, or it's going to be about the same, and that a lot of that has to do with moving results back. If you need to perform operations that say take a large amount of data and produce a very large array and send all that data back to the client, well, that takes some overhead to move that data. You might be moving not all the same records to the client before that array gets generated, but just moving the array back for like a large virtual list array. But we found, if, depending on how much data you're sending back to the client, it could also be slow, and there could be even cases with Execute SQL, for example, where it's even slower. But in almost all the tests we've done, with the kind of standard vanilla operations that we all use all the time, and now we're avoiding as much as we can, like large batch deletes, replaces, creation of records, summarization of data, encapsulation of data into arrays for the purposes of dashboards and reporting. These things now don't have to be avoided. In general, you can just offload them and have the result that you want, or get back just that tiny chunk of summarized data that you're looking for. So we've gone over our time to make up for the time we lost in the beginning. Let me go ahead and bring up our final slides here and thank the other members of the FileMaker Academy for allowing us to use this platform to share this with you. If you want to meet with any of them or talk to anyone about FMRPC, all of them have the ability to help you get your hands on it or implement it and help you with it as well. So they're all listed here. And of course, on the next semester's class, which I don't have the exact date, I apologize, but it's probably in July, and we'll make sure that we post that as well on our Twitter feeds. And if you're on the mailing list, you'll get it as well. It's going to be Logic. And I believe that's all the content and time we have for today. We'll review
it's on July 17th, Mark.
July 17th, thank you.
And I believe the topic is security in cloud-based deployment.
Excellent. So again, sorry for the rough start, folks, with the technical issues. Look forward to you guys downloading and trying out FMRPC, and look forward to your feedback on how you're using it or what we can do to make it better. Thank you for your time.